The South African War, also called the Second Boer War or Anglo-Boer War, was fought between Great Britain and the two Boer republics, the South African Republic and the Orange Free State, from October 11, 1899 to May 31, 1902. Even though it was the biggest and most expensive war the British fought between the Napoleonic Wars and World War I, it was fought between two sides that were not even close to being on the same level. So who emerged victorious? And what were the dire consequences? Let's find out. The British had almost 500,000 soldiers in southern Africa, while the Boers could only get together about 88,000. But the British were fighting in a hostile country with difficult terrain and long lines of communication, while the Boers, who were mostly on the defensive, were able to use modern rifle fire well when attacking forces had no way to get around it. The war was a preview of World War I, which would be fought with breech-loading rifles and machine guns, with the advantage going to the defenders. Historians still can't agree on what started the war, and the debates are just as heated as they were during the war. While British politicians said they were defending their suzerainty over the South African Republic or SAR, many historians say that the real fight was for control of the rich gold mining complex in the SAR called Witwatersrand. It was the biggest gold mining complex in the world at the time when gold was becoming more and more important to the world's economies, especially the British. Even though there were a lot of Uitlanders, non-Dutch/Boer people, mostly British, working in the Witwatersrand gold mines, the complex as a whole was not directly under British control. Also, the discovery of gold on the Witwatersrand in 1886 helped the SAR make progress on modernization and compete with Britain for control of southern Africa. After 1897, Britain's High Commissioner for South Africa, Alfred Milner, worked to weaken the SAR's political independence. He demanded that the Boer Republic's constitution be changed to give political rights to the mostly British Uitlanders. This would give them a large say in making state policy, which would likely be more pro-British than the SAR's current policy. Martin Estienne, president of the Orange Free State, held the Bloemfontein Conference between Milner and Paul Kruger, president of the SAR, in May and June 1899. The conference failed to stop a war between Britain and the SAR. Kruger did offer to make some changes for Britain, but Milner didn't think they were enough. After the conference, Milner asked the British government to send more troops to southern Africa to help strengthen the British garrison there. The troops started to arrive in August and September. The increase in troops scared the Boers, and Kruger made more concessions about the Uitlanders, which Milner again turned down. When the Boers saw that war was inevitable, they went on the attack. On October 9, 1899, they gave the British government an ultimatum, saying that there would be a conflict if the British did not pull their troops out of the bordered area. The deadline came and went without a solution, so on October 11, 1899, war broke out. The war can be split into three different times. During the first phase, the British in southern Africa were not ready and did not have a strong military. Boer armies attacked two fronts, from the South African Republic into the British colony of Natal, and from the Orange Free State into the northern Cape Colony. The northern parts of the Cape Colony rebelled against the British and joined the Boer forces. At the end of 1899 and the beginning of 1900, the Boers won several major battles against the British and besieged the important towns of Ladysmith, Mafeking, and Kimberley. During this time, the Boers won important battles at Magersfontein, Colesberg, and Stormberg. This period from December 10 to 15, 1899, came to be known as Black Week. The British were caught off guard by Kruger's offensive in October 1899. But when a lot of extra British troops showed up at the beginning of 1900, it was clear that the Boers would lose in the end. Lords Kitchener and Roberts led the British to free the towns that had been besieged, beat the Boer armies on the field, and quickly moved up the rail lines. In February 1900, the British took over Bloemfontein, which was the capital of the Orange Free State, and in May and June, Johannesburg and Pretoria, which were the capitals of the SAR. Kruger escaped capture and went to Europe. Though he tried to get help to fight against the British, he was not successful. By the end of 1900, the war was at its most dangerous. Boer commandos, led by great generals like Christian Rudolph de Wet and Jacobus Hercules de la Rey, kept British troops away for 15 months by using hit-and-run guerrilla tactics. They made it hard for the British Army to get supplies and communicate, and a lot of the countryside in the SAR and the Orange Free State, which the British had taken over as the Crown Colony of the Transvaal and the Orange River Colony, stayed out of their control. Kitchener responded with barbed wire and blockhouses along the railways, but when these failed, he retaliated with a scorched earth policy. The farms of both Boers and Africans were destroyed, and the people who lived in the countryside were rounded up and put in separate concentration camps, where many of them died because of the terrible conditions. The plight of the Boer women and children in the carelessly run, unhygienic camps became an international outrage. Nonetheless, the commandos kept attacking, and many of their attacks went deep into the Cape Colony. General Jan Smuts led his troops to within 50 miles of Cape Town, but Kitchener's harsh and extreme methods worked in the long run. Boer resistance was worn down, which caused divisions between the bitter enders, who wanted to keep fighting, and the hands-uppers, who had given up and now worked for the British. In March 1901, an offer for peace was made to the Boers, but they rejected it because it required that the Boers recognize the British annexation of their republics. Hence, fighting went on until May 1902, when the Boers signed the Peace of Vereeniging and gave up their independence. In the end, pragmatic Boer leaders such as Louis Botha and General Smuts trumped the will of the freedom fighters and opted to negotiate for peace based on British suzerainty, promises of local self-government, the swift restoration and efficient management of the gold mines, and crucially the alliance of Boers and Britons against black Africans. Nearly 100,000 people died during the war, including more than 20,000 British troops and 14,000 Boer troops. More than 26,000 Boer women and children are thought to have died in the concentration camps from malnutrition and disease. The total number of African deaths in the concentration camps was not recorded, but estimates range from 13,000 to 20,000. On both sides of the war, national pride reached a level that was typical of the time. In May 1900, when the siege of Mafeking was lifted, the British went crazy celebrating. Despite attempts at rapid healing of the wounds after 1902 and a willingness to cooperate to unite against black Africans, relations between Boers and English-speaking South Africans were to remain frigid for many decades. Internationally, the war made it harder for Europe's big powers to get along since Britain found that most countries were on the side of the Boers. Studies of the war's effects on Africa's black people didn't start until the 1980s. This was because South Africa was very racist for most of the 20th century. In addition to the thousands of people who died in the concentration camps, many black Africans were caught in the sieges, lost their jobs, or were forced off their land in areas where the war took over. The most surprising thing about the war may be that it was fought between groups of white people on a subcontinent that was mostly made up of black Africans, who both sides tried to keep out of the fighting. However, research done in the late 20th century showed that black Africans were heavily involved in the war, both as fighters and as victims of the armies. During the conflict, the British hinted and sometimes promised that in return for support, or at least neutrality, black Africans would be rewarded with political rights after the war. Still, the Treaty of Vereeniging said that black Africans would not have political rights in a reorganized South Africa. This was because the British and Boers were working together toward the same goal of white minority rule. This brings us to the end of this video. If you liked the video, please consider subscribing and sharing so we can keep bringing more content like this. Also, let us know your thoughts in the comments below. See you next time.